14:30 hours. Time to go for a bus ride. A little-known secret about Costello was his affinity for the truth. He would seek it from those who maintained it, those without privilege, those without riches, and those without time. These missions he went on weren't some kind of independent research or corporate scouting detail. He had a real Jones for reality, even when it was painful. He called the hotel concierge, not our very interested concierge from the expo, but the pimple-faced college freshman who had the metro schedule handy. Costello was about 500 milliliters deep in extra añejo and armed with a flask. Time to go waste another day not getting any closer to Jenna and go goat-waltzing. It's what Costello called going out and seeking the truth from people he would never be situated with in his scripted life. Goats are such curious animals, full of life, hopping around with a desire to survey their surroundings and absorb existence. Costello found himself connecting with the essence of these creatures as he waltzed around cities drunker than he should have ever been. Costello boards the bus with a handful of change, and the bus driver adds a shove to the transmission shifter, as though it weren't already in park. Without hesitation, she says, "You're from California, ain't you?" Costello responds with, "If you weren't so damn good looking, with that kind of insight, I'd assume you were Trinity from the Matrix." She lays her head back and unleashes an echoing laugh. He's not sure she's up for any of his goat waltzing. On the contrary, she asks him to sit up front because she hadn't any good company all day. Costello breaks the ice and says, "I don't know about you, but I don't think I'll be ready to end Leo season." She responds, "Honey, I'm sure about two things. The sun eventually shines on a dog's ass, and the House of Zodiac doesn't wait for anyone, so once it's Libra season, show some respect." Costello's amygdala tilts and he says, "I'm fairly sure Virgo season comes after the 5th house of the Zodiac, and I can sit my ass in Leo season as long as I'd like." She gave a smoker's laugh like he'd never heard and said, "Well, I'm a Libra, honey. Virgos just keep the seat warm for us. We run this shit, and if you're willing to disrespect Libras like that, then you're a Leo through and through." He couldn't believe the first bus he hopped on shot him point blank with the truth he needed, like Jared Leto needs heroin in Requiem for a Dream. In fact, she was so pure, he knew nothing else could be so unfettered. He needed to up the ante. He pulled the cord for a stop, and she glared at him as though he'd fired off a flare. Then she smiled and gave him a nod. He looked at her and said, "You know I'm 78% sure hell is while your eyes are open?" She responded, "So explain the other 22%. Costello pulled his flask from his pocket, took a swig, and said, "When you're blackout drunk." She pulled over and saluted Costello like he was the last living gladiator. He knew he didn't deserve to be validated like this, so he found the first diner in sight, walked right by a man sleeping in an alcove, and stormed up to the hostess. She asked him if he'd be dining alone. He didn't answer her question, just ordered 2 meals to go and a light beer. Picked up his order when it was ready and dropped it off with the stranger sleeping in the alcove. It was unbearable for Costello to know he continually sheltered himself inside of downtown Los Angeles apartments and overpriced hotel rooms, while thousands of his brothers and sisters slept in camps or alleys or vehicles because their faculty settled them there. He knew one thing for sure. No one should judge a human who sleeps on the street until they've experienced it themselves. Whether it be mental health or bad luck, a conservative approach of pulling up your bootstraps wasn't how Costello aligned himself. If he could afford to share his meal or buy them a pair of socks to help heal their feet, he played white noise over the voices of the holier-than-thou crowd. Some people see heaven as an abode for gods, where people are rewarded for good behavior, Costello said to the man. The man grabbed the styrofoam container of unknown food and said, Well, what do you think? Costello replied, I think that heaven and hell are with one accord, an alliance. The man asked Costello, so what do you fear most? He smiled and said, the smell of patchouli. They shared a laugh and Costello walked towards the next bus stop. In all his years goat waltzing, he'd never once had back-to-back encounters where he walked away enlightened. There was no turning back now. Time to turn up the heat and find some more truth. The añejo was settling in and fighting the adrenaline, so no better time than now to fuel up. He unscrewed his flask and took in another 100 or so milliliters. Right as he walked up to the next bus stop, this bus pulled up and gave him a sense of urgency. This driver didn't give a shit that he paid in coins. Just sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up. Costello heeded this notion. Then a man walked up the steps and refused to pay the fare. He looked square at the driver and said, what the fuck are you gonna do? He was right. What was the bus driver to do? His minimum wage didn't subsidize mercenary action. Just close the door and let the passengers know a terrorist is on board. This guy wasn't really a terrorist, more of a rock coke enthusiast who needed to get a few blocks. They'd mastered this technique. It was almost universal. Costello had seen it in Los Angeles. Just drive me a few stops and nobody gets hurt. They all knew the driver wasn't there to stop them. Honestly, society isn't there to stop them. 2 stops later, our villain exits. Nobody is harmed, but the driver records another humiliating moment in their life. Costello sees his window and says, there are so many wonderful people in the world and so few of them are recognized for it. The bus driver smiles, clears his throat and says, why do you think that is? Costello says, because we are a terrible species. The driver responds, now that's pathological. Costello asks, why do you think that is? The bus driver pulls over and says, because I hate my father. Costello acknowledges nobody needs to exit the bus and took his cue. The driver says, I think this is your stop.